Excellent. I've just done a screen share. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever people are across our beautiful globe. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the Yugambeh Kumanberri people, the traditional custodians of the country in which I find myself gratefully on right now on the Gold Coast. Huge thank you to the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and the team for this opportunity to be involved. My background is in environmental science, and I also went on to study a law degree. And I studied science and environment because I had that innate curiosity and connection to nature. I wanted to understand a bit more about how our planet works. I went on to study law because I wanted to understand how we can actually use our legal system to better protect and preserve Mother Earth and other members of the Earth community, and not just use the law to exploit and to use the law to degrade our beautiful planet. So I did the first Earth jurisprudence course with Michelle Maloney at an Australian university about 4 years ago. And Earth-centered everything really resonated for me. It was such a great filter to understand looking at the world through this lens of Earth-centeredness. So I find myself now as an educator, someone who's passionate about earth justice, passionate about animal rights, and really harnessing my skills and experience to share some of the perspectives and understandings and knowledge that I've developed over the years, with the intention of, in this case today, is supporting the global rights of nature movement to support this earth-centered and ecocentric way of life, and highlighting some gaps that I believe are currently present within this space. So I think it's so important that we reevaluate our relationship with animals and nature, and we can do this and contribute to a profound cultural transformation through doing so. So culture is an umbrella term which encompasses social behavior and norms found in human societies, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, laws, customs, capabilities, and habits of individuals in these groups. I believe it's about examining where we are currently and seeing what needs to change, and then to create and highlight that new vision. So this talk today is going to be touching upon the rights of nature, animal rights, veganism, which I believe is a modern way of expressing ecocentrism, and how can we embrace this to expand this movement with consistency and integrity. So this first slide here, on the left-hand side, we have the ego approach, and the right-hand side, the eco approach. We have the left anthropocentric or human-centered worldview, and on the right-hand side here, the ecocentric, earth-centered worldview. And these by no means are the only two worldviews, but they're this is probably one of the most profound, simple, powerful slides that I've found, because it just sums up so much. So we want to be moving away from that anthropocentric over to that ecocentric worldview. But we need to first understand the elements of these different worldviews and how they present themselves in our culture, in our governance, in our society, within our legal systems, and within our hearts and our minds. So with this anthropocentric worldview, we've seen this hierarchy. It's all about the illusion of separation, where we have human superiority, which is something that's promoted. We have speciesism, where we discriminate based off an individual's membership to a particular group of species. Carnism, which is the ideology that conditions us to eat certain animals. We see non-human animals as property, right? We see nature as a resource and something to be commodified. And all we do is focus on the extrinsic value of nature. What can we as humans get out of nature? So these are some of the elements of this human-centered worldview. And it's a very destructive, outdated paradigm and way of viewing the world, which I believe doesn't reflect reality at all. Now, these beliefs are deeply institutionalized. They'll influence our legal system, business, economy, religion, education, influencing our minds, influencing the way we see things, especially in terms of our relationship with animals and nature. These worldviews affect how we interact, view, and treat animals and nature. Now, as a result of this, we see this human-centeredness permeating our society. And in one example here, this is an aspect of our legal system. So here in Queensland, this is the first and foremost, the best, essentially the main bit of legislation for how we regulate our relationship with animals. And this is the Animal Care and Protection Act, Queensland 2001. Now, the first sentence of this act, the intention of this act, as you can see I've highlighted, is to promote the responsible care and use of animals. This legislation is intended to promote the use of animals. And we can already see the human-centered influence that is coming through with the words used in our legislation. And this is essentially legalized exploitation written by humans to allow humans to continue to do what they want to non-human members of the Earth community. Now, this bit of legislation really focuses on providing the highest level of protections for domestic companion animals, such as cats and dogs, whereas the animals that are part of the animal agriculture industry and other industries which exploit animals are not protected to the same level as our companion animals. So we do have this speciesism which is present in our laws. Now, these laws are based off the animal fair paradigm, where it's concerned about how do we humanely use and humanely slaughter animals. It's wanting to support animal exploitation by making it legal and to provide the legal framework in order to continue doing what we're doing. Now, this is in stark contrast to an animal rights perspective, which I will expand on that difference a bit later on. One thing I just want to highlight here in section 3C is the legislation aims to protect animals from unjustifiable, unnecessary, or unreasonable pain. Now, posing a big question here, the best reasons we have for exploiting and consuming animals are culture, taste, convenience, as well as pleasure. So most of our exploitation of animals across the world is not done from a place of necessity, not done because it's necessary for our survival. So here is a shot from a drone. Now, this is a screenshot taken from a documentary called Dominion, which highlights the standard industry practice for our use and exploitation of animals here in Australia. And this documentary is very hard-hitting, very powerful, and very confronting. Now, Dominion Cat was released a few years ago, and you can see here we've got hundreds, if not thousands, of livestock in pens here. And it's just this image is to show an example of how this human-centeredness has permeated our society and how we have restricted the freedoms of non-human animals. We have essentially enslaved them. We have taken away their freedoms and their right to life, for example. Now I'm offering some perspectives here as best as I can from the perspectives of the animals, because I believe we are all doing our best to be a voice for Mother Earth and for non-human animals. We need to be able to connect with people in ways that resonate. So we've got the animal agriculture industry across the globe, which is producing meat, eggs, dairy, and a whole range of other products. And we've got a current global pandemic, COVID-19, which is, with all the available evidence, it's becoming very clear that COVID is stemmed from a zoonotic disease, which has occurred as a result of our exploitation and consumption of animals. Now, the animal agriculture industry is having a huge effect in terms of the products and human consumption. I'm not qualified to discuss nutrition, but I'll chat a bit more about that later on. But in terms of the environmental footprint, so the animal agriculture across the globe, the collective industry is an absolute ecological disaster. We're talking about this industry being a leading driver of a range of environmental harms, such as biodiversity loss, ocean dead zones, deforestation. Animal ag is a huge, huge contributor to climate change. And the United Nations has labeled meat as the world's most urgent problem. So the group Beyond Zero Emissions produced a land use report, and they reported that when we're looking at the global warming potential over a 20-year period, as opposed to a 100-year period, because we need to focus on solutions that are going to have an effect today, not in 100 years' time. So when we look at a 20-year global warming potential, we see that the effect of methane and its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions becomes, it has more of an effect over that short period of time. And so much methane is produced through our animal agriculture industry. So looking at that 20-year time frame, of Australia's total greenhouse gas emissions can be attributed to agriculture. Now, this is not solely animal agriculture, but majority of this percentage is animal agriculture. 56% of Australia's total land, for example, is currently being used for grazing. Massive footprint across the globe in terms of water use. Oxford University released some research a few years ago, which was the biggest study into food production systems across the globe, where they researched over 40,000 farms, from small-scale organic animal agriculture to the big-scale intensive agriculture, small-scale organic plant farming, everything in between, you name it. And their conclusion was that the animal farming sector is the most one of the most destructive industries on our planet, given their environmental footprint, and we need to be urgently transitioning our diet and food systems to plant-based organic systems. So massive environmental footprint, and again, this is a result of the human anthropocentrism, exploiting and commodifying animals, resulting in massive impact on the planet. As I mentioned here before, the United Nations is making this very clear. We need to tackle this environmental issue, and shifting our diet to avoid meat, dairy, and other animal products is the single cheapest, quickest, most effective way for us to minimize our footprint. Now, a lot of people will say, well, hold on, what about the big monocrops, for example, the destructive monocultures? And yes, they are a huge problem. Now, interestingly, about 80% of the globe's soy production is actually given as feed for livestock anyway. And a majority of the Earth's corn is also given as feed for livestock. So a lot of these big monocultures that are wreaking havoc across the world are, again, it all falls under the animal agriculture industry. So the message is clear. We do need to shift our consumption habits. And this diet shift is one aspect of the vegan philosophy and lifestyle, which I'll be discussing shortly. So I'm just want to bring back into that earth-centered way of being. If our current consumption habits and ways of viewing and interacting with animals is having a profound impact on our environment, on our life support systems, is one of the drivers of this current pandemic and global crisis, the picture is becoming certainly clearer. We must question our culture, our ways of interacting and viewing nature. So the animals. Now, these are some of the things that really shook me up when I started researching and delving into the statistics behind this. So across the globe, we are breeding into existence and killing 70 billion land animals a year. These are 70 billion members of the Earth community that are being killed because majority are in our food systems because of our desires to consume their flesh, cultural justifications, taste, for example. And across the globe, we're looking at 6 million animals killed each year for food. Like this is a loss of life. This is violence and something which needs to be brought into public awareness. These statistics are very confronting, but we need to put ourselves into the shoes of these animals. When I studied environmental science at Griffith University, interestingly, the environmental footprint of animal agriculture was not discussed. So the impact of animal farming is being suppressed largely, and there's not enough information that's being put out there, promoted to the public, which ultimately leads to disempowered, uninformed people. And we need to be inspiring, educating, informing, and empowering people with information and knowledge. So, and that was one of the main drivers for me to jump into the line of activism and educational work that I'm currently pursuing. So guys, in Australia, in 3 months, we've killed 167 million chickens, 82,000 calves from the dairy industry, almost 5.5 million lambs. Now, our consumption habits as consumers results in these lives being taken. We must make the connection between our choices and the consequences that it has on the environment, on the planet, and on other members of the Earth community. Okay. Now, one of the aspects of our culture has been our conditioning, has been our education. And Carnism, which is the invisible belief system that conditions us to eat certain animals, is something which is really prevalent within our choices, within our consumption habits. And this is the reason essentially why, have we ever wondered why we love dogs, eat pigs, and wear cows? You know, very different treatment in terms of these animals. And Dr. Melanie Joy did her PhD 4 or 5 years looking at the psychology behind our beliefs about animals and us eating animals. So it's a very interesting bit of research. And essentially, Carnism is something operating in our subconscious that goes unquestioned. It's a very dominant and violent ideology prevalent in our society at the moment. Okay. Now, some of those things were very hectic. We're talking about environmental destruction. We're talking about loss of life, the exploitation and suffering of animals. And it is very heavy. It's very dark what we are doing to non-human members of the Earth community. But we as humans have created this. And we as humans have the power to transform this situation. We have the power to change the direction and create a different vision of a better, healthier, respectful world. So this is where we can bring in the opposite of the anthropocentric worldview, the the earth-centered or ecocentric worldview, where we see nature as a whole and we acknowledge that nature as a whole is more important than any individual component. We acknowledge that humans are part of an interconnected, beautiful earth community, that we share this planet with other members of the earth community. We see animals not as a collection of objects, but as a communion of subjects. So stemming from this ecocentric worldview is the global rights of nature movement. And the rights of nature movement is the recognition and honoring that nature has rights. It's a recognition that our ecosystems, including trees, oceans, animals, and mountains, have rights just as humans have rights. Now, of course, the sharks are not going to have the same rights as humans. The bees are not going to have the same rights as humans. But we are talking about the fundamental rights that each species or member of the Earth community should be afforded. So within this rights of nature space, we are seeing the discourse and discussion that, hey, the rivers, forests, mountains, and animals should have their rights upheld. But for a long time, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the existing animal rights movement fitting within or co-supporting each other to advance animal rights and to support the rights of nature and broader earth jurisprudence movements that we are promoting here. So a lot of the focus of this conference has been on the systems, the policies, the cases, the governance, and a heavy focus as well on understanding from the Indigenous and First Nations perspectives and their epistemologies and looking at the culture through their eyes, which is a very connected, earth-centered perspective. And for me, when I realized 4 or 5 years ago that I held these beliefs of wanting to promote kindness and respect and peace and justice, and I considered myself an ecocentric, I realized that there was a lot of alignments with the vegan philosophy and lifestyle, which for me was a very important element in my advocacy and educational work. So veganism is not just a diet. We're talking about a philosophy and lifestyle which seeks to exclude, as far as possible, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. And by extension, promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of humans, animals, and of course for the environment. So we need top-down approaches. We need horizontal approaches, bottom-up approaches to all of these issues. And veganism is one way that we, on a daily basis, I believe, can embody those ecocentric beliefs, because this is a whole new way for me of interacting with the world around me, a whole new way of viewing animals and how I treat animals. So we've got, I believe, I think for a long time, veganism has been misunderstood. And a lot of people will say, oh, veganism is so extreme, for example. But the more I explore it, the more I embody and live like this, I really feel it's that process of reconnecting to the beliefs and values that are already present within us. And most of us here at this conference, I would assume, are here because we wanted to create a better world, a healthier world for the environment, for animals, for humans. So I feel like those beliefs already exist within us, but it's a process of reconnecting to those beliefs. So I was a fisherman at some point. I was eating and exploiting animals. And for the last 5 years, I've made a conscious decision to, as best as I can, not support animal exploitation, which is in alignment with the ecocentric worldview of not viewing animals as nature and not viewing animals or nature as property or commodities. So there's a big difference between the animal rights and animal welfare. And for a long time, I didn't realize there was a distinction to be made. Now, most of our laws and the way in which we interact with and view animals is based off this dominant paradigm, which is the animal welfare position. Now, within this position, using animals is considered morally acceptable. We can use animals for our benefit. Our interests as humans are always more important than the interests of animals. And it's based on the idea that we shouldn't cause animals unnecessary suffering, pain, or death. And we should be treating animals as humanely as convenient to us. Now, in contrast to this, we have the animal rights perspective. And the animal rights perspective says, hold up. The most important rights we should be granting animals is the right to be free, the right to not be enslaved, and a right to life, to have those fundamental rights upheld. And we should be always treating animals as humanely as possible and to eliminate human main causes of animal suffering. So similar, but also in some ways they need to be, distinguished. And I think drawing upon this, the philosophy of animal rights, we can start seeing ways in which we can include these ideas and concepts within our legislation, within policy, and to help guide us moving towards a more ecocentric world and culture. So with so I've got 2 slides here, which is talking about the abolitionist approach to animal rights. So there's 6 principles, which I'm going to highlight quickly. So the abolitionist approach says all sentient beings, human or non-human, have the right to not be treated as the property of others, which is consistent with the ecocentric worldview that nature and animals are not property. We must recognize that we must abolish and not regulate animal exploitation, because drawn an analogy here with human slavery, for example, we'd realized human slavery was unethical, immoral, and it needed to end. We didn't decide to then regulate human slavery where we said Monday to Thursday, you can have human slavery, but on the weekends, no, it's banned. There was global concerted efforts to end this oppression and a denial of freedom of humans. So we need to be looking at abolishing the use of animals, because this is from the animal's perspective, they would want nothing less than this, right? So principle 3, using veganism as a moral baseline, and that we must promote non-violent and creative vegan education. So if we replace the word veganism with being kind to animals, then we can start seeing things differently. And I feel like that's what it's about. It's setting our ethical, moral standard to not support the oppression and use of other beings. It's as simple as that. So the 4th, 5th, and 6th principle, we link the moral state on human animals with sentience alone, not with any other cognitive characteristics. So it's not enough of a justification to say, okay, well, because this animal has a different intellectual capacity than us, we can exploit them. We don't apply that same logic when it comes to humans which have cognitive impairments or disabilities. We don't say we can use and exploit them because they aren't as smart as us. That, we can't use that same logic when it comes to humans. So we need to be looking at sentience as that most important key between the moral status of animals. Now, just as we reject all forms of human discrimination, racism, sexism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, and classism, we must reject speciesism. which again is the discrimination of particular individuals based off their membership to a particular class or a particular species. So speciesism, this is something which we really need to be promoting the use of this word, because it's another form of discrimination. It needs to be normalized, the use of it, and then to work against speciesism. We need to be working against racism. It's not enough for us to not be racist but not speak up against injustice. We need to be speaking up and taking action against injustices. The final principle is that non-violence is a core principle of the animal rights movement, which is something I'm in big support of and promote. So these words, these concepts, these theories, I've focused so much time over the last few years thinking, imagine if the world was operating off these principles and philosophies. And I'm sure there'll be people out there that may not agree and may not want to see a world like that. But I just ask you, what are those reasons? If we can understand what's driving our thought process and those core beliefs that underlie our decisions and our perspective, it might be very, very insightful. So I'm currently running as a candidate for the upcoming state elections here in Queensland, representing the Animal Justice Party for the seat of Burleigh. And in our 10-point plan for kind of Queensland, we do have one of our main platform election promises is to be looking at extending legal personhood to nature and animals. So now, over the years, I've been a passionate vegan activist, animal rights advocate, someone who's studied law, who's understood science, and I'm wanting to step up and use all of that and lean into an opportunity to make a difference within our systems of governance as well. So we can tackle so many of these issues from the top down, from the grassroots level on our day-to-day basis, and we need to be taking action everywhere. And it's so important that we do this. So within our policy, I won't expound on it too much, but we're looking at acknowledging the rights of nature, for example, for the Great Barrier Reef, challenging the property status of animals within our legislation, and really advocating for the rights of Mother Earth and animals to be considered within Parliament. And this is something that if we are successful and if I'm voted in a few weeks' time, I'll be promoting these changes in our society and governance. So that was a huge, essentially like a big, I suppose, a big burst of a whole range of content and ideas and concepts. So I'm hoping that some of these ideas will sink in, that some seeds will be planted, that we can start sort of seeing some of the connectivity between the rights of nature movement within the animal rights movement, and how veganism can feed into this cultural transformation that I believe is so, so important. So if we believe that we want to create that ecocentric world, then we must be embodying the philosophies and principles of this in a day-to-day basis as often and as possible as we can. And I want to see a different world for all members of the Earth community, including this beautiful weaver here, which was a photo I took in South Africa last year. And all beings just want to live free. All beings want to just, exist and do their thing and, spend time with their family or friends or other animals. And we can create a kind of less violent world, which upholds the rights and acknowledges the rights and interests of all members of the Earth community. Wonderful. So if anyone is interested in connecting and supporting any of the work I'm doing, I'm interested in any collaborations, please get in touch. My email address is there, and I'm also on most of the social media platforms. Just want to thank you guys for your attention and for your time and for leaning into this fantastic conference. I've had an amazing few days, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all and answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott.